hunt, fish when we were really young. But by the time I was an older teenager, I was just about fully independent. My parents trusted me to be out and about alone quite often. The town I lived in, as long as it was a clear night, was very normal to see all sorts of strange lights in the sky. The winter is long up here, and I spent a lot of time under those stars. It was incredibly beautiful for anyone who didn't mind the cold too much. Sometimes I would drive a snowmobile a few miles out of town and just lay in the snow looking up at the sky. The northern lights were also a pretty common sight. It wasn't something that happened every day, but often enough that people up there were pretty used to it. Now that I live in the lower states, I realize how many people would just love to see them. But up there, they started seeming ordinary after a while. So on this one night, I had a lot on my mind and I couldn't sleep. I decided to go out on one of my midnight drives. I didn't tell my parents, and they were probably asleep anyway, but I knew they wouldn't mind. I took the snowmobile and I drove a few miles over the hills. I wanted to find a spot without any light pollution from the town. There, I shut off the engine and settled into a good spot to look up and have some good time thinking. I was in a relationship that was kind of driving me crazy, and I was trying to decide what to do about it. So at first, it was just the usual scene. I watched a few satellites passing over here and there. I picked out the constellations that I knew. But after a while, I started noticing a clicking sound. At first, I thought it was the sound of the snowmobile cooling down, like the engine expanding and contracting in the cold. But then I realized that the sound definitely wasn't coming from that direction. I sat up and I looked around, thinking maybe there was some animal nearby. I was prepared to get out of there fast, just in case. I didn't want to be dealing with a wild animal in the middle of the night, but I thought that the clicking sounded way too regular for it to be coming from an animal anyway. Also, it was pretty mechanical sounding. The more I listened, the more I realized that the sound seemed to be coming from above and in front of me. I was staring upward and just seeing what I usually saw. Stars, some northern light action, a satellite crossing the sky, all normal things. After a while, I was getting too cold and was about ready to head home. But I noticed that something looked odd in the aurora borealis. There were these 3 super bright points of light. At first, I thought they were stars, but they were too perfectly placed. And they were definitely getting brighter. I kept staring and watching them, continuing to get brighter and brighter. At this point, I swore the clicking noise was getting louder and louder too. And then it just stopped. And the lights were gone. And the clicking wasn't there, and everything actually sounded extra quiet. I was getting pretty stiff and cold and maybe slightly spooked. So I got up to leave, but then all of a sudden, this bright 3-orbed object was hovering above me, much closer now than those 3 lights had been, and the clicking was loud. It was triangle-shaped with 1 light orb on top and 2 underneath, all simultaneously moving together. I bet 10 to 20 seconds passed, but it felt like an hour. And then all of a sudden it went from hovering to hitting warp speed in the blink of an eye, and it shot up into the horizon and disappeared. I jumped on the snowmobile, and don't you know, it was taking longer than usual to start up. I was starting to worry, but then quickly it started running, so I headed back to my house. My mind was full of speculation, wondering if what I saw was some kind of weird behavior of the northern lights that I had never heard about. I pulled up to my house, thinking I had to get inside and get to bed without waking everybody up. But then I saw that the windows were all lit up, which was really strange. And I'm now wondering why my parents would be up at 2 o'clock in the morning. I had left around midnight and was gone about 2 hours. I went into the house and my mom was awake and standing in the kitchen making coffee. I looked at the clock. It said 6 a.m. I just stared at the clock, not understanding. And then I realized I must have been out there staring at those clicking lights for like 6 hours. There was no way, but I sure couldn't argue with the time. I ended up telling my mom and dad the whole story, and they were just blown away by it all. But they're the kind of parents who know me well and know that I wouldn't make stuff like that up. I never even ended up going to bed at all that day. That was one of the most amazing things that has ever happened to me. And I've yet to see it again. So, people often say that working in a care position is less of a job and more of a vocation. Certainly most of the people I know who work in this sector do it for reasons other than money. There are far easier ways to make a buck. The hours are long and the work is undeniably taxing. But of course, it's about more than money. We all do it because we care. I've been working in care, specifically in the care of the elderly, for over 15 years. This sector in particular has its rewards. The number of fascinating characters I've encountered during my time could fill a library. There's so much knowledge and history wrapped up in these individuals that sometimes just listening to them reminisce makes the job worth it. You wouldn't believe some of the stories I've heard. But in Maurice's case, perhaps you should hear it. I had been personally attending to Maurice for about 2 months when he decided to share his story with me. The day that he opened up was like almost any other. I had bathed him, prepared his meal, and had helped him get settled into his favorite chair by the window. The only real difference was a report on the news that seemed to have him all stirred up.